Thank you. So thank you so much for Nancy for doing all the work to get this program up and running. And my name is Suma Mudan. I am a master gardener. I am with Fort Bend Master Gardeners for the last 8 years. Actually, Nancy and I are from the same class, and we have become very close friends. That's one of the advantages of doing Master Gardener course, because you will make lifelong friends, not only with plants, but with people as well. And today, this is the second class in this series. The first class was Landscape Basics, when Peggy talked about the fundamentals of landscape success. And now the second class is actually laying the foundation by talking about soil. And for this segment, we have Boone Holiday. Boone, before I talk about him, I can say this: he can single-handedly can teach all these 10 classes by himself. So he knows so much. And I always wonder, when did he have time to learn about this? So he is very capable of answering any questions or teaching any class. So let me introduce him formally. It is a big task to do that. So Boone is the extension agent in horticulture for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, which is based out of Rosenberg in Fort Bend County. So he holds an undergrad degree in horticulture from Stephen Austin State University, and he also has a master's degree in agricultural education from Texas A&M University. So even long before he got any of these titles, degrees, he was an avid gardener all his life, and he was a whiz kid plant enthusiast. He brings previous experience as horticulture staff at Moody Gardens in Galveston, Producers Cooperative in Bryan, and the Texas A&M Department of Horticultural Sciences in College Station. So having work experience in many horticultural sciences in College Station, in retail horticulture, to landscape design and irrigation installation, he brings that knowledge paired with enthusiasm into Fort Bend County programming efforts. He's happily married to wife Sony, who is a terrific cut flower garden grower, and he is the proud father to daughter Bailey, and he resides in Full Share. So with that short introduction, welcome to the class, Boone, and we are really looking forward to this treat today to learn all about soil, what we are doing wrong, and what we can do better. Thank you, Boone.
Thank you, Suma. Let's see. I'm going to see if I can figure out how I get this into the computer to give you. Is there a slot? Just playing. Thank you, Suma, and thank you everybody for joining us today for Landscape Success. And we're going to talk about soil. You want to call it dirt? That's fine with us. We'll get over it. But soil is probably the most important part to successful gardening. And if we don't address soil texture, soil drainage, compaction, tilth of soil, nutrition, then we cannot grow plants successfully. So naturally, we would start with that before we get into talking about trees and shrubs and grass and annuals, perennials, and everything else that we see in the garden, the aesthetic part of gardening, that we would kick this off with what we can't see, and this is our soil in the garden. So I'm gonna go through a PowerPoint presentation, and then I've got some examples of some soil sample results to show you, and go through kind of the importance of each of those samples. I would encourage you, let's see where we're at here. I guess I need to share. I'm going to share my screen here. I would encourage each of you to type in your questions in the chat feature, and then Nancy and Suma will wrangle those questions, and then we'll be more than happy to answer those as they come along. I'll let them decide if it's pertinent to the moment of the presentation. So Suma, just chime in whenever you feel it's necessary for us to address questions, okay?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So we are doing all these courses of landscape success wrapped around the fundamentals of Earthkind landscaping program. And this is a program that's administered by Texas A&M Horticulture and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension to focus on a group of guiding principles that one, allow us to have beautiful and aesthetically pleasing landscapes, but also doing it in a way where we're addressing environmental issues. So we're not just gardening to garden, we're gardening being cognizant that we are doing it in a wise way where we're not having negative consequences on the world around us. So here's all these guiding principles of Earthkind. If you chimed in or tuned in to our previous presentation, Peggy did a fantastic job of outlining all of these guiding principles of Earthkind, starting with planning and design, designing practical turfgrass areas on the landscape, appropriate plant selection, soil improvement, efficient irrigation and rainwater harvesting, effective use of mulches, and appropriate maintenance. So all these guide have certain goals attached to them on how we can have a lesser negative impact on the environment around us, and a positive impact by implementing these by soil improvement, by being able to absorb and capture moisture in soils better. That's avoiding runoff into unnecessary fertilizers and pesticide runoff. It is encouraging compost. So we're minimizing landscape waste. So a whole lot of fantastic principles that guide our full discussion of landscaping through all these classes. But today, it's all going to be about soil. So some of the things that's important about this is that we want to improve water retention in our landscapes. So when we get a ½ inch of rain, we want that rain to stay there, so that our landscape plants can benefit from it versus that moisture hitting a hard surface and washing down to the storm drains and leaching off of the property instead of soaking in where we get the benefit of it. We're encouraging a natural balance and fertility in the soil so that the plants have what they need, and that we're not adding overabundance of any particular nutrient that may have a harm on our landscape and may have an additional harm downstream from us that would maybe end up in an algae bloom in our creeks, streams, and lakes. A decrease in pest and disease pressure, because if plants are happy, if they have all the nutrients that they need to grow, then they are less prone to being susceptible to insect and disease pressure in the landscape. And the list goes on, but these are just some main reasons why this is important. To some people, we just call this dirt. Here, this is soil for us. Agriculture in the United States is still king, and we do a lot of farming across the United States. And this is a soil that was given to us by thousands of years of development of soil eroding down from mountains into flatlands, and plants growing on that soil, depositing roots, decaying animals. That's taking thousands of years to develop. And so it's something that we have to take care of, because if we don't, it goes away much faster than we're able to rebuild it. So definitely keeping soil conservation in mind with everything that we do in our home landscape. So here's just a little snapshot of kind of what we're talking about with soil. That it's not dirt, it has all this stuff in it. We talk about half of this are solids. And so they're either going to be a mineral composite, which is this main section here. We've got a sliver of organic matter. And so this are carbon-based, dead, decayed, previous living organisms. So trees, shrubs, grasses, animals that have all died and decomposed. This is the organic matter right here. And everything here is our minerals. So this is our sand, silt, clay, loam, and then half of our soil composite is going to have air pockets, so that we have air penetration through the soil profile, and about 25% of water in the soil. So this is representing a good snapshot of a healthy soil profile. So just to help you kind of understand where we're at and how we got here concerning soils, is we're going to overlay a couple maps here. One is our elevation map for the state of Texas, and you can see quite a significant change as we get up into the Panhandle out here in far west Texas. The Rio Grande dips down here around the Chisos Range, Guadalupe Mountains, and then up to the Rocky Mountains, moving down here towards the Gulf Coast. So highlands and sea level all right here close to each other. So we overlay that topography change with rainfall, and the fact that where we're at over here, we're getting, if we look at this map here, we're getting 40 to 48 inches. Actually here in Fort Bend County, 46 is our magic number for rainfall. So if we overlay this topography map with this rainfall, it's going to help us build this map. And this is our geology of Texas that supports the fact that as we get closer to the coast here, we have these basal ridges of deposits that have moved down for millions of years, have moved soil down from the highlands and the mountain ranges down along the coastline. And then as this coastline has shifted, which, would have been way up here, down to here, we have these deposits of soil. So this really shows here for Houston. Here's Fort Bend County. We've got a couple river basins coming through here. This represents the Brazos, Colorado down here. We've got the Bernard River right in between there. So a lot of rivers that are constantly bringing sediment down and depositing that here along the coast and the flatlands. So this is why we tend to have flatland, mostly deposition of clays that have came from way up here in the high plains through years and years. So your soil is parent material that used to be all the way up in here. If we look at the Brazos River, for instance, it's pretty interesting. We follow this back. The watershed for the Brazos River is all the way up in here, North Texas, from like Glendale, Granbury area, all the way up here past Lubbock. And so all this here, every time they get a heavy storm, a little bit of soil moves down through these little creeks, ravines down into the Brazos, and then they all work their way and they're spit out right here at Surfside, at Brazos Port, and it's deposited along the coast. So I don't know. We've gone this direction for thousands of years. It looks like at some point we might be going back the other direction. We'll see, but that's where all of our soil ends up, and it's going to set the stage for the next layer of soil there. So geeky soil stuff, but does explain the fact that most of us right in here have very similar soil base, and this is going to be what we call Houston or Victoria clays, which is this grayish, dark grayish, brownish, heavy clay soil that's pretty indicative as we move along this area of the coast right here. As we get a little higher, we come off of some of these highland areas like the Katy Prairie that drop down into the Brazos Basin. And we do see some alluvial deposits of loam that would have been previous coastal range. And so, if we look at the northwest corner of Fort Bend County, we get into a little topographical drop, and you do see some pretty nice loam soils in those areas, but probably 95% of the soil in Fort Bend is going to be Houston, Beaumont, or Victoria Range clays. So what does that mean? Means right here, this is our soil triangle. It shows all the different classifications of soil. So up here is clay. Over here is silt. Over here is sand. Okay, so if we have combinations of those, that's what defines loam right in here. So loam, there's different types of loams, and they're just named based off of the percentage of silt, clay, or sand within the soil. So this right here, this star, this really represents the designation of our clays here in Fort Bend County, our Victoria, Beaumont, or Houston clays. And see this star right here, this is kind of like the pinnacle of soil. If you have, they say, pay dirt or the good stuff, this is where it's at. So you've got some sand in here, you've got some clay, but you've got some sand in here that's going to allow for air in the soil, some friability, drainage within the profile, but you got enough clay that clay gives you some structure, and that it absorbs and holds water and nutrients much better than sand or silt. So you want some clay in the soil, but we want much less than we have really in our soils here, because they're prone to compaction. With silts and sands, if you drive on those or walk on a soil, we get rain, it has the ability to shift up and down, versus if you walk or drive over a wet clay soil and it compacts, it has a really hard time of releasing that compaction. And so more and more these soils become hard to work because of compaction, and we have to address that. Suma, any questions so far?
Not, I don't see any so far.
All right, so what we have here, this is a graph that shows a water movement on soils. So what we have here, and this one here is large pore space soil, which is a silty or a sandy soil. If I take this bottle of water, poke a couple holes in the bottom of it, fill it up, and just set it down in a spot, if I see the moisture moving out away on the soil surface, that's going to tell me pretty quick, one, that I have a compacted soil or I have a clay soil that has poor capillary action. This wants to go out across instead of being absorbed through the profile. So adversely, if I had sand, like if I took this bottle down on a sand dune and I set it down, we would not see any moisture around here. because it's just going to penetrate straight through the profile and just start working its way down. So this is just a good test just to test your compaction and your infiltration of water in your soil profile. That, you know, it's going to help you decide if you need to address soil compaction, or potentially you need to address the way you're irrigating a certain type of soil. You know, for instance, here, if we're applying a lot of water and irrigation to a heavy clay soil, then most of this real quickly, if we put on a lot of water very fast, it's just going to percolate across the top of the soil profile and probably leach off the curb down into the street and then go down the storm drain instead of working down. So we may want to think about, if we have spray irrigation, it would be a cycle and soak type of spray application, or look at drip irrigation that's going to apply water slower so that we can allow that water to slowly percolate down instead of washing off the surface. All right, here, so this is another picture here that's showing, you know, different profiles and how this is impacting plant health. Is our surface soil. If we have a loose surface that has that good balance of air, water, and minerals, then we can encourage the plants that we grow to have roots that work through the surface soil and actually have the ability to start penetrating down into the hard pan or the soil depth, versus if we don't address tightly bound soils that are compacted, the roots have a much harder time penetrating down to this subsoil, because they're limited in even getting through the surface compaction. And so we tend to see a lot of roots moving back and forth right under the soil surface, scavenging for water and nutrients. And so the impact there is that we have a smaller plant, a stressed plant that we want to get down here to be able to mine moisture and nutrients from deep down into the soil. That's a great thing. And also the deeper we can get these roots to grow as they decompose, we now have created these channels deeper into the soil. So when we get rainfall, that water is able to percolate down and then re-moisten the subsoil for future water needs from the plants. So here again, you know, at the surface here, this is what we want to see as far as a soil texture versus a compacted surface soil. Here, it looks more like a brick than a nice friable soil blend.
So there is a question related to compacted soil, Boone. The question is from Michael: how do you address soil compaction in a cost-effective manner and with minimal human energy involved in its correction?
That's a good question. There are a lot of techniques out there, but probably the most practical and efficient is going to be a combination of aeration and organic matter applications. So what we tend to see, some of the higher end, like turf management companies, they will recommend a spring aeration and compost application to turf grass areas. For flower beds, you know, it's kind of a no-brainer. You know, we're not trampling around our shrub flower beds very often. We tend to be applying either compost, at minimum we're adding mulches once or twice a year. So those beds are naturally going to be in pretty good shape, because as that organic matter that we've applied here through the mulch and compost, as it decomposes it's worked down deeper into the profile by earthworms and other invertebrates. So they tend to be in pretty good shape. But when we get into turf areas where we're walking out there more regularly, there's not as much root depth from the species of plant we're putting it on. We tend to see some compaction. It's going to look more like this picture here. So an aeration is going to be pulling a probe, a thin profile of soil, usually up to 4 inches deep, out of this compacted area. And if we can come in right afterwards with a top dressing of compost, after a good rainfall, that compost will penetrate down into these pores created by the aeration, and those allow little tunnels within the soil, one, to decompress this compacted area, and also to allow little tunnels for air and water movement down to this next layer of soil, which starts to encourage the roots to grow deeper. And once the roots can grow down into this subsoil, it will begin breaking up this compaction naturally. So in flower beds or planting beds, that's composts and mulches, and just avoid unnecessary foot traffic in those beds. And in turf grass areas, it's probably once a year or once every other year lawn aeration, followed by a compost application. So the compost application component to that is optional, but I recommend it because with our soils, if we pull that probe out, and even though it lands up on the surface, after several rainfalls, that clay is just going to fill those voids back in, and we really haven't accomplished a whole lot when we get into that. But if we can fill those voids with some organic matter, then as they start to shrink back, now we've allowed a little bit of material in there that's going to allow air and water to penetrate through. Very good question. Okay, so I've probably said organic matter about 100 times so far. So basically, here's the scenario. Where we all live, this is all coastal prairie habitat. So before we got here and put in streets and houses and all the amenities that we enjoy, this was just a big vast seasonal wetland prairie, and we had plants, tall prairie grasses, forbs growing, occasional wildfires moving across, animals eating this, dying, and all this stuff naturally would die and decompose. And so we have this natural layer of humus on the soil that naturally adds the nutrients back into the soil. But if we think about our artificial environment, we move on to a site and we plant grass and a couple shrubs and a tree, and we don't have this anymore. We don't have this constant degeneration of life forms cycling themselves into the soil. So we have to add this organic matter through multiple forms to kind of recreate this concept of humus, so that we have this life in the soil, a soil that can provide food for microbes and worms in the soil, so that they can not only persist but have vigor, and then that will add benefit to the complexity and the dynamics of our soil profile. It needs to be a living thing. It's not something that we can sustain artificially. So all this stuff with humus, it takes all these algae, nematodes, yeasts, bacteria, fungi, and then all these big organisms that are moving, tunneling through the soil, creating air pockets, eating large chunks of organic matter, wood branches, old decaying roots. This is kind of the first step is, all these things, they have to digest that to a small enough particle size that the fungi and bacteria can take benefit from and break it down any further. It needs to be broken down all the way to the point where each of those individual nutrients are allowed to be re-released into the profile. Okay, so all the important things for us here, here's just a short list of organic matter in the soil. It's loosening it. It's aggregating a soil, what we call tilth of soil or soil structure. It holds nutrients. It holds water. It increases aeration in the soil profile, provides food for the microbes. It buffers our pH, so it keeps our pH within the range that we want it to be at and doesn't allow it to sway so quickly one way or the other. Regulates soil temperature and prevents soil erosion. So a lot of good reasons why we would want to be thinking about ways that we can add organic matter into the soil. So if you go to the garden centers, compost is probably the most recognizable product that's out there. And then there's other products that are called soil conditioners or landscapers mixes. There's peat moss products. There's a whole range of mulch, wood mulches, and all this eventually is going to break down and provide this humus for us in the soil that will begin doing all these great things for us that we can't see, but all great things that are happening. So again, here showing kind of a side by side of a couple soil profiles. One here that is a native soil, and one here from a impacted soil where we have not applied the sources of organic matter. As you see really quickly beneath this root zone, very compacted soil here versus a natural depth of soil. As it's broken down and worms have penetrated through here, we have a pretty good depth of to 3 feet of organic matter, a good humic layer here. So this is going to be very good for a planting area, and this is going to be not very good. And unfortunately, we're kind of at the mercy of developers in our area. And so we may see soils that look somewhat like this early on when our houses are built as new developers move in, because they're sourcing topsoil usually from just soil pits that may not have any humic acid, no organic matter in there. And so you can start with this. That's not good, but with regular applications of organic matter, we can start working some life back into this profile. All right, so that's the organic matter component. Let's move into talking just a little bit about fertilizers. We've been at the nursery centers in the last couple of weeks. So once the temperatures warmed up a little bit, they start pulling out those pallets or bags of fertilizer, and everybody is grabbing them fast. So just give you a little bit of insight and considerations on how we might want to be more choosy and selective about our fertilizer types. Before I jump into that, Suma, do we have any questions on hold?
Not yet. I think once we start the fertilizer, I think a lot of people will have questions because I have questions.
Yeah, this one's kind of complicated, but there's some simple pointers here. So when we buy a bag of fertilizer, there's a couple things here that we would want to look at. First one, is that these three numbers here, if it is a complete fertilizer, it's going to have these three numbers listed. And either on the front, I flip it over on the analysis, it will be there as well, listed as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK. And so the first one here, our total nitrogen of this fertilizer is 12%. Our phosphorus here is 4%. And then our potassium level is at 8%. And so these are the listed actual nutrients within this fertilizer, and these are called our macronutrients. And these are really the three nutrients that plants use in the most abundance in the landscape. That is why most fertilizers are limited to these three. You can get into fertilizers that go down to 3 additional macronutrients and then an additional 8 micronutrients. Beyond that, if you wanted to really start nitpicking of what we have or don't have in the soil. Further than that here, this says this is 50% organic in this analysis. And then we have here that this is 3.6% of this is water insoluble nitrogen. So this means that this is a slow, that nearly 4% of the 12% is a slow release form of nitrogen in this soil. I mean, in this fertilizer. So a couple things you'd want to look for is organic. You want to look for slow release or water insoluble on the tag words on this, because we want this food to stay around for a while. If this is completely a water soluble nitrogen, that means it's readily available. And so as soon as we put that out and apply some water to it, there's a couple of things that's happening, particularly with the nitrogen. Is one, it is water soluble. So if we get a heavy thunderstorm, a lot of that nitrogen is going to mix into the water and it's going to leach out into the street and down into the storm drain and turn into a bunch of beautiful green algae down in the watershed or the creek down the way. Most of these water soluble forms of nitrogen are highly volatile. So it starts getting warm outside, it transfers into gaseous nitrogen and simply evaporates out of the soil. And then third, nitrogens are heavily used by plants. So they uptake it quite readily. So if we don't have this slow release form of nitrogen on our fertilizer, then it doesn't last very long. And this is an example here of what we get with that. Okay, so here's a graph that shows time versus growth in a grass here with a fast release fertilizer. We apply this within 2 weeks, we have a huge jolt of growth. And then pretty quickly right after that, it's used up and the growth diminishes back down, versus embedding some percentage of a slow release capsulation of your fertilizer. We have this growth pattern, but it's really spread out longer throughout the growing season. So there's a couple things. One, as a lazy gardener myself, if I'm fertilizing, I want to do it one time during a season. I don't want to have to come back and reapply fertilizers. So I want this application to last as long as possible through the growing season. The other part with this is this type of growth is better on the plant. Okay, it's able to to take advantage of it with growth of foliar growth, but root growth as well. And this develops a healthier plant versus a plant here that is growing so fast, can't hardly keep up with itself, and is going to be prone to more pressure from disease and insects in the landscape. Also, probably considering drought stress as well, is that it won't have a time for these leaves to harden off before it gets too hot. So we can have multiple stressors with these quick release forms of fertilizer. Yes, Suma?
So there is a question about what's the best way to start planting in sandy soil if the water is like, not hold or held.
Yeah, the best thing that you can do if you're preparing a new planting bed is the application of a substantial amount of compost, and then incorporate that into the soil profile. And then moving forward would be to keep either a good thick layer of wood mulch on top of that soil, or occasionally add top dress with a compost so that we can get more of this humic layer that's going to be able to sponge moisture and nutrients and hold them in that profile longer. If we don't do any of that on a very sandy soil, with a heavy rainfall, the nutrients simply leach right out of it. And so we could have, an inch of rain, and then 2 days later, it would look like it hadn't rained in weeks. But you can avoid that by periodic, maybe annual top dressing of compost, but definitely with a constant, 3 or 4 inch layer of a good wood mulch on that surface. We'll definitely address that. And a disclaimer here is that sands are not bad soils. There's just things that we would want to do to a clay soil, and then there are things that we want to do to a sandy soil to make improvements on them. For areas along the coast where we get substantial rainfall during the late summer months, having a sandy soil is a great thing, because that water, it is able to percolate through the soil and dry the surface off faster, so we're not hanging around in a swamp for weeks like you would be if you had a clay soil.
There is a follow-up question to that. Is the type of fertilizer different for sandy soil versus other soil?
It could be, and that's going to be based off of your your soil sampling, and I'll get to that here in a minute.
Okay.
So looking at all these, and I keep bringing up nitrogen, and I'll explain that here in a little bit. By far, this is we say up, down, and all around is kind of this concept: up, down, and all around. So nitrogen counts for green growth. So this is the up. So if we're wanting new foliar growth, good green leafy growth, nitrogen is the nutrient that makes that happen. Phosphorus, it goes down. So we're thinking of our root system. Also helps with flower and fruit development. And then our potassium is all around, which we would call just plant health and durability. But on a pound to pound basis, nitrogen is our most important. So we tend to look at that most in fertilizers. It's hard to find a fertilizer that has a 0 here on the nitrogen, because usually we're deficient at some amount of nitrogen in mostly all soil profiles. We talk about organic sources of nitrogen. All these here, sludge, commercial compost, manures, alfalfa meal, cottonseed meal, have pretty good levels of organic form of nitrogen, which is slow release. So if we apply this back guano, this 10% of nitrogen that's in the back guano is not readily plant available. It has to be broken down by microbes in the soil before it is released. So if we're talking about a true slow release fertilizer, these organic forms of nitrogen are definitely that. And then we get into here with our synthetic forms, our man-made forms of nitrogen that are commonly available. Probably most common is ammonium sulfate. And then second most common is going to be our urea here, 21%, and then 46%. So the question is, do we see any issues with this 21 or even a 46% nitrogen in this fertilizer? I hope that we see there's a red flag here that goes off that talks about issues with that. So if we look here, slowly available, so these are going to be our organic or encapsulated forms of fertilizer or nitrogen. And then these are going to be our man-made, readily available synthetic forms of nitrogen. So we look at all these characteristics here. Response time. So if I put down ammonium sulfate, very quick. So that's going to mix in with the water, and it is going to be plant available instantaneously. Burn potential, yes. 46% nitrogen for that urea. Definitely, this will burn the plants, the leaves, the roots, if we don't apply that correctly. The application, we have to apply this more frequently because, like I mentioned, it is either leaching away, it's volatilizing, or it's being used up. Water solubility, very high, so it's mixing with water and moving through the soil profile. A residual in the soil, very short, so it's being used up, it's going away. The cost, I say varies, but right now I'm going to say it's high. If you haven't been attached to agriculture lately, fertilizer costs have gone up about 300% in the last 6 months. Leaching potential is very high because this is water soluble, and if we get a heavy rain, it's going to either percolate down or it's going to leach off of our soil profile into the road, which allows us to talk about surface runoff is very high, where it's moving out down the driveway, down the gutter, and into the drainage creek. So, adversely, all these doing a much better job of feeding the plants slowly, but also staying put and being used in your landscape. All right, we're going to talk about pH here.
So while we are on the topic of fertilizer, when is the best time to fertilize? I know that it depends on what the plant material is, but if you can explain.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So our common answer is going to be while the plants are actively growing. So we do have a long growing season in Southeast Texas, but we do have a winter and we do have a dormant time period. So I see a lot of people, and I don't like being the guy that goes to the garden center or the box store and seeing the guy loading bags of fertilizer in January and talking to him. I don't want to be that guy, but I feel bad because they could just take that money and just throw it off of the Brazos River Bridge, and it would do about the same thing for them, because those plants are dormant. And the thing with southern turf grasses is that while they're dormant, they actually lose about 80% of their root system. So they, not only does the top kind of wither back and brown out, the root system minimizes close to the basal part of the plant. So there's no feeder roots there. So any application of fertilizer in the winter while the plants are dormant is doing nothing for the turf grass. And I won't even get into the discussion of, well, it greens it up. Well, the science is evident that says that there's no feeder roots on the grass. So you're really not doing anything except you're fertilizing cold season winter vegetation. So you're fertilizing weeds is really what you're doing. You're encouraging weed growth in those areas. So so this easy rule of thumb would be during the active growing season for our southern turf grasses, late spring going into early summer is kind of a high ridge of growth. During the midsummer, late July and August, the plants aren't really growing very much. They're stressed, it's too hot. And then in September into the fall, we have another little wave of growth. So if we follow those waves of growth, it's going to suggest that for a lawn area, we're going to get our best bang for our buck if we fertilize in maybe mid to late April, and then fertilize again at the beginning part of September, and capitalizing on those growth periods so that the plant is getting the most out of those applications. For landscape plants and trees and shrubs, same thing. Oak trees doing most of its annual growth in late spring, the first part of summer. So trying to fertilize trees, that's going to be your optimal time. And then same thing with your annuals, perennials, and your shrubs in the landscape, is if the plants are putting on new green growth, then that is the time that you would want to be applying fertilizers. Now, a lot of this, when we get into the flower beds, you can kind of go back to the discussion on soil organic matter, is that it's going to be less crucial for timing, because if we have a bank of these naturally derived nutrients in the soil that's being released from the organic matter or the humic layer in the soil, then that buffers nutrition a little bit, so it's not quite as crucial as far as timing of fertilization.
So the next question is, are there things that we can do, like kitchen things that we have at home that we can use as fertilizers, like eggshells for calcium and onion peels and citrus peels, things like that? If so, how do we do that? Is that advisable? Or
yeah, all that stuff. I think you want to actively compost that first. So there's lots of different ways of home composting. A static compost pile is just a ground pile. And so there's lots of different frames where you can just throw the kitchen and yard refuse into and let it break down naturally. There's the compost tumblers, there's vermicompost bins where you can worm compost in the kitchen. So that's a whole nother topic, but just, the direct application of this material into the landscape is probably not a good idea. One, it's going to have a hard time breaking down, and within some things with kitchen scraps, we may be inviting varmin into our landscape unintentionally.
so, Boone, are you going to touch upon mulch later?
I
There are a
can.
couple of questions on mulch, so we can wait till the end of the talk if you want.
Yeah, I'll do that. Let's hold that to the end.
Yeah, okay.
Let's get into pH. You can see by the picture how exciting it is, but it's important. So pH, this stands for the potential of the hydrogen ion in the soil, and defines of whether or not we've created a acid or a base out of any chemical that we can define has a pH. But for our uses here, the simplicity of this is just to note that we are on a scale of 0 to 14, where 7 is neutral. So if it's the acidity, we're calling this acid. If it's alkaline, we're calling this a base in our soil. And so why is this important? Well, because whether or not this is fluctuating away from 7 one way or another, it affects nutrient uptake and availability within our soil. So this is a pretty busy little diagram here. So I'll try to go real slow. So if we look down at the bottom, here's our pH designation, 4, which is, this is very, very acidic. And then 10 on this side, which is very, very basic. And then our magic spot here is 7, really 6.5 is kind of our sweet spot for optimal plant growth for most species of plants. And this is because we get into all these nutrients, they become limited as the pH in the soil skews from acid to base. So the further we get away from this 6.5 here, most plants have a harder time taking up nitrogen because because it's chemically bound in the soil by the profile and the chemistry within the soil. So we want to be in this range. The further we get up here, higher, we may have enough nitrogen in the soil profile, but it becomes limiting on both sides. You see here we get skewed a little tighter here with phosphorus, and then as we get down to iron, manganese, boron, they shift quite a bit. They shift way down here, and thus bringing our ideal pH down just a little bit away from 7 to get us right here along this line of 6.5. And this is like the disclaimer here, this is most plants. So there are some plants that are recognizable for liking lower pH, or what we call acidic soil. And these would be things like azaleas and blueberries, some cane producing plants. They like it a little bit further down here. And this is because of their root system and their ability to uptake nutrients in the soil works differently than other types of plants. But we would commonly say that if you are in this range, we're doing pretty good. So there's some different tools here that you can buy, fairly cheap at the garden centers that just gives you a rough rudimentary reading as far as our pH. Are we balanced? Are we slightly acidic? Are we slightly basic? But better than these, we're going to talk about soil testing that will actually give us our actual pH and give us ways that we can adjust that. Let's roll past that. Okay. So again here, our ideal soil for most plants is a pH here between 6 and 7. And our primary nutrients, our nitrogen, we want from 2 to 4% nitrogen in the soil. And then this kind of goes down as we start getting into these micronutrients, into a parts per million amount. So thus these right here, our macronutrients are the most important, focusing on that we try to balance those correctly. One thing that I would like to discuss is this phosphate or phosphorus in the soil. So these are these elements or nutrients are delivered in compounds in the soil, and these compounds or molecular compounds have charges to them. They're either positive or negative charges on the compounds, and that affects bonding to other nutrients in the soil. And so phosphorus is one that we can, is a positive charge compound. And so as we get higher levels of phosphorus in the soil, it's like a magnet. It starts bonding with all the other negative charge compounds in the soil and holding them tight. And you get into a situation where it ties up other nutrients in your profile. So, it's to suggest that, a limitation of nutrients is something to look for, but an overabundance of nutrients is also very important because it could start messing with the chemistry and the availability of those nutrients to our plants. So be careful, buyer beware. So this is where it gets important for us to start trying to fine tune our applications of fertilizers so that we are not creating our own problems. Okay, so all right, so I'm talking a whole lot about soil sampling. I've got some show and tell stuff here I can get to you, but this kind of sums it up here real quickly. Is this gentleman is holding a soil probe. You don't necessarily have to have a soil probe. You can use a spade shovel, and we're creating a composite of several of these cores from a defined area in the landscape, and sending those in to the soil lab for analysis. That's our website here for our soil lab. But let me see. How do I get myself as a full screen? Stop share. Let's try this real quick. Stop share. Okay. All right. Let's see if I can. Can you make me a presenter so I'm spotlighted? How about that? Does that work? Suma, can you see me on there?
Yeah, you are
Okay.
spotlighted. Yeah.
Okay, so if you go to the website, the URL listed on there is soiltesting.tamu.edu. There's a thing that says publications, and then this is one of those. It's a 4-page document on how to collect and send samples into the lab, and it goes into significant detail on defining a representative area, and then the different I'm trying to do this, the different methodologies of how you prepare your samples, how you dig them with a spade shovel, like up here, and then add those into the soil bag and sending them to the lab, all the instructions on how to mail it out. And this right here is a soil sample packet. We have these here in our office, and we provide these free of charge for people. You don't have to use this. You can use a Ziploc bag and then just write the information on the bag and seal it up and send that directly to the laboratory. But if you grab this here at the office, we do have these here free of charge. And then there's the form. So they need some basic information. So I filled this one out here just roughly for you. Everything that's underlined there in orange are the necessary things: your name, your address, county that you're in, Fort Bend, your phone number, email, and then your payment selection. And then this one right here is how you want the sample. I would just suggest that they email the results to you. It's free to do that. If you want a snail mail copy, it's $2 additional, which is not terrible, but everybody has email, so just go that route. It'll be in a PDF form, and so you can print that off at the house. So mostly what I tell people, if you don't do this very often, start with just a routine analysis. And so that's this one right here. That's the base sample. And then on the back here, it has the list of all the designations. So are we growing annuals, vegetables, turf grass, trees? So we want to look on there and see what it is that we're trying to grow in this area, and then designate that on the sample. Let's see if I can get this bigger. All right, cool. So with this, you have a couple sections. It says test area or sample ID, and I'm designating that as veg 1. So that'd be like vegetable garden 1. Square feet of the sample area, I'm just going to say that's 500 square feet. Fertilized, well, you can just put a question mark. If you remember when you fertilized, put the date. Next one here is what was the type of fertilizer that I applied. If you know what type of fertilizer that was, put it there, how much you applied, or you could just say, well, I put some compost in there. And then over here, it says I am growing D. Well, D is the thing back here. And I'm saying that I'm sending this from a vegetable garden, which is D on the back. So that's what goes in there, is the D. And then over here is the analysis requested. 1 is, again, the routine analysis, just the $12. And that gives you your macronutrients and your pH. And so that's a good starting point, honestly, for most people. When you get into some of these other ones, you're testing for organic matter, your macronutrients, salinity, and any potentially toxic minerals in the soil and levels of those. So, for a greenhouse grower or a vegetable farmer, it gets more crucial to look down deeper into this. But just to give you the snapshot, what I think is important that you can help guide you with your fertilizer application. This is all you need: routine analysis, probably once every 2 years. Your soil chemistry shouldn't change a whole lot within that time period. Okay, so another little show and tell here. So this is the bag that you have to have it filled up to this level here so that the lab has enough soil to test. Make sure that you remove any rocks, roots, tree debris. They're not going to, that can't be tested. Just good soil, good loose soil. So on the bag here, the ID is that veg 1. Okay, so that matches up with the veg 1 that I put on my form here. It's got my name and my business on here, if you have one, doesn't matter. And you just package that up, and then just any type of little box is recommended, so that this, if this gets thrown out of the postal van, it's not destroyed. So I'm going to put that in here, taking my form, folding that up. If I'm paying with a check, I'm putting my check inside this and folding that up and putting that in the box, and then just take that to the post office or UPS or whoever and mail it out, and then they will send you results back. Depending on the season, spring is the busiest season in the soil lab because everybody's getting ready for garden season. But anywhere from 2 weeks to a month. If it's the pinnacle of spring, it's going to take a while. There's quite a backlog, but most of the time, within a week to 2 weeks, if it's downtime, they'll get the results back to you. I just saw a little question popped up on these bags. Every county has an extension office, and so you can go into your county extension office and request these. Sometimes we're out around town doing events and we have them with us, but again, you don't have to have the bag. We just offer this as a service. You can simply just take a Ziploc bag and write the same information on there. The vegetable 1 is our sample ID and our name. And that's just to make sure that the soil lab doesn't get them mixed up with other samples, particularly if you're sending in multiple samples. This becomes very important so that they're testing the right location for you in the garden. All right, Suma, do we have some more questions?
So the questions we have pending are about mulch right now.
Okay, well, we'll see. We'll keep holding those for 1 minute.
Yeah, other than that, yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about the result real quick. Okay, can you see my screen again?
Yes.
All right, so this is a pretty typical soil result that you'll get emailed to you, and it'll have your sample ID here that you send in, and then the designation of what you were growing in this spot. So first one here is our pH, and this result came back, it says 8.1, moderately alkaline. So this is slightly high, but not terrible, moderate. Our critical limit is, this says CL. So our critical limit there is 6.5. So that's our magic spot. So that's our pH is a little high there. So we might want to look at ways to bring that down. As we get into our nutrients here, along this graph line, there is the same, this critical limit. And this is kind of like our sweet spot. All right. So for all these, we want this level to go up and be somewhere right around this line, one side or the other. So moderate, high, right in there. So we'll start off here. Our nitrogen level here is right here at the N on none. So very low. Are 3 parts per million of nitrogen in this soil. So it is way below this critical level. So they're going to recommend that we apply a nitrogen fertilizer in this area. With all these others here, we're floating right here along this critical limit. Some of them, this calcium is quite high. It's hard to control calcium in the soil because there are a lot of soils that are very high in calcium, particularly as you move towards the hill country. Limestone is calcium, and so those soils will be overabundant in some of these. And then we see some of these that kind of creep up a little bit, but all in all, this soil is not bad. And you're probably saying, well, it doesn't have any nitrogen. Well, nitrogen is easy to apply. So what we can do here is the recommending is 1.3 pounds of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So we would calculate that depending on the amount of the percentage of nitrogen in a fertilizer applied over a 1,000 square foot area to bring this level, start bringing this up back towards this line. Next thing here that's important is right here, we've tested for organic matter in this sample, and this is sitting at 5% organic matter. And what we tend to say that 5 to 7%, that's a really good amount of organic matter, a good bank of organic matter in a soil profile. If we get less than 5, then we have less of a buffer. So these nutrients can start moving quickly back and forth a lot faster, where they're kind of held in this organic profile longer, and they're more stable in the soil. Equally, if we get above 7, then we start getting into an overabundance of organic matter, and it's going to cause availability of nutrients to go way down, because these nutrients get bound up in a decomposition process from microorganisms that are eating in the soil. So we don't want, more than 10% organic matter. Gets pretty hard to manage. So this one's pretty good. So this one, 5, it gets a check mark for me. All this gets a check mark except this nitrogen. We want to address that, and we probably have to continually address it moving forward to keep that level moving kind of back up towards this range again. So I'm gonna move back out of this for 1 minute. I'll come back to that in a second, but I wanted to show you something I thought was pretty cool. Let's see. Go. Oh man. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna have to just pull that back up that way. All right, Suma, can you see my screen here?
I can see you.
Oh, you see me. Okay, hold
Yeah.
on. All right, let me share screen. Okay, how about that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so so these this was pretty interesting. We just did a bunch of soil sampling in the gardens recently, and got some pretty good results here. So this was a vegetable garden that we just put in soil from a garden center. We bought bulk soil, and so it comes in here that, we're kind of right around that zone, a little high. Of course, here we're very low on nitrogen, but we've got this 31% organic matter here, which suggests that, when we buy this bulk soil, it's a lot of composted mulch that's in there. So eventually this is going to turn good. Right now it's not, because we have to start breaking down this 30% organic matter before we'll have balanced nutrition in the soil profile. So our pH on this 8.1. Again, this is a little high. So what we can do to adjust our pH is add sulfur. So there's products at the garden centers, either granular or powdered sulfur, and it has, if you look at the back of the bags, there'll be a graph that shows how much we're trying to adjust our pH, and then how many pounds of that product is recommended to apply to the soil to start bringing that pH down to the level that we want. So we want to try to get that closer to the 6.5. We probably won't ever get it all the way down here, but we can adjust that with sulfur. Equally, if this pH was low, was acidic, like 6.0, we would apply calcium. Calcium has a alkaline effect in the soil, and so it will buffer our pH up the other direction to get us back up to this amount here. So sulfur if we want to go down, and lime or calcium if we want to go up with our pH. All right, so again, we got a couple of these here that I'm just going to scroll. I wanted to show you one here I thought was interesting. Okay, this one here. All right, so within this one here, we got a 7.5 on our pH. Our nitrogen is void. With our phosphorus level here, it's starting to really bounce up. it's going pretty high. So beyond the recommendations of adding fertilizers, the lab actually puts a note on here that says phosphorus is highly elevated. Avoid phosphorus containing fertilizers and organics for the next 5 years. Retest annually. So we're sitting at 20% organic matter, which is really high. And we have this elevated level of phosphorus in the soil that really needs to come back down because it is binding with these other nutrients that are necessary in the soil. So really all we want to do on this one is apply a nitrogen fertilizer, just nitrogen. We don't need anything else on the soil profile here. So this, oh, goodness gracious, can y'all hold up 1 second? If you don't, I'm sorry, just give me 1 second. Apologies. All right, so this says a whole lot. You know, we can adjust our pH here. We can adjust our nutrients here, and we can, if you went with the organic matter on here, we get a snapshot. Again, 5 up to 7% is a sweet spot there. So we would know on this, we need to quit adding compost or any other organic material in the soil so that that can start being digested and brought down. So let's see, I'll close that. Bring this back up. Okay, start share. PowerPoint. PowerPoint. Okay. The good thing about this is you'll get the PDF in your email, and if you need help with the interpretation of this and get into this recommendation of fertilizer, you can contact us here with the Master Gardener Hotline office, or myself here in the Extension office, that we can you can email us this PDF, and then we can analyze this and make recommendations. If we go to the Soil Lab website, it does include some fertilizer calculators, so you can put in the amount that's recommended, and then it will it'll spit out a fertilizer type and the pounds of the actual fertilizer that you would need to fulfill the recommendations. So like I mentioned, 1.3 pounds of nitrogen, that's actual nitrogen. So if we had like a 21% nitrogen fertilizer, like ammonium sulfate, it would be 5 times this amount, because we're just talking about the nitrogen, not the total volume of fertilizer that we're putting out. So it's there's some science to it, but it's pretty easy to break down. This is really the way to fertilize, because we're looking at what's in the soil and what is limited, and we're just applying those things so that the plants get exactly what they need to grow. Rarely do you get that in commonly available pushed fertilizers that are out there. I'm not saying that lawn food is a bad thing, but in this case here, it's probably including some of these nutrients that we don't need in this soil profile here. So we're just we're putting out stuff that is not going to be used by the plants, and it's probably going to end up places that we don't want them at. So Again, you can reach out to us at the extension office, reach out Master Gardener hotline members here, and we can help you analyze this recommendation. All right. Let's see. All right, let's this right here. We're going to ask that you give us our feedback on the presentation today. If you've got a QR reader on your phone, you can click on this little QR code, and it'll take you right to a very short, very brief evaluation for today's class. You can also, if you don't have a QR, you can type in the URL there in blue in the middle, and that'll get you to the survey as well. Let's talk mulches for a minute while you're looking at the screen. This is the last screen of my presentation here today. But
so there were
mulch.
two questions about mulches.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to find the first one. Okay, so from Carol, if she's still around, we have a common area with St. Augustine turf that doesn't grow well because it's heavily shaded by live oaks. The lawn care contractor piles the leaves up in one place and runs over them with a riding lawnmower. Can the ground up leaves be so thick that this will hurt the grass?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, for several reasons. One, particularly with live oaks, is the leaves take a long time to break down, and so the layer of those will compile on the surface, and so that stuff is not breaking down, so it's not actually getting to a point that it's becoming humic where it's capable of re-releasing nutrients back into the soil profile. And it's also, it creates a level that we call hydrophobic, where if that's just layered leaf matter with irrigation and rainfall, has a hard time percolating through that leaf surface, and it'll just wash off the profile instead of absorbing down into the soil. And those types of spots, recommendation would be to rake out a lot of the accumulated leaf debris, and then applying a layer of compost, kind of like you would be using as a mulch in that area. And what that's doing is it's allowing a little bit of shade from the soil, the UV from the sunlight will further compact and dry out those bare spots, and just the breakdown of the compost in those spots will allow the turf grass to start spreading its stolons or its rhizomes back into those voided areas and fill in those void spots. But if you leave the bare spots where there's tire tracks, just bare soil, a lot of times it's very hard for the grass to grow back into those spots because the surface gets cakey, crusty, and compacted, and it's hard for the plant to grow back in it. So if we can shade that soil with a little compost, eventually the roots will move back into those areas. And what was the question on mulch?
Yeah, the other one is what is a good wood mulch?
Well, we could sit around and we could talk about that probably for a couple of days and argue with each other, but ultimately a mulch is a mulch is a mulch. We're using hopefully a waste product, a byproduct of either forestry operations or landscape refuse that's being recycled back into the landscape. So, we would want to maybe prioritize a mulch that is sourced locally. So this is not really that it's better for your plants, but maybe it's better for your local environment, because that's materials that aren't going into a landfill, that are cycled back into the environment. And so around here, that's either going to be called Houston mulch, native hardwood mulch. There's a lot of words that kind of describe that, but all that kind of lends to those being sourced locally. We get into materials that are have to be transported here from other regions across the United States. That has an environmental footprint with it, and particularly mulches that are sourced particularly for mulch. So we get into eucalyptus and cypress are mulches that they grow pulp trees specifically to grind up and use for mulch. So we would say maybe that's not a great thing. If we have a huge byproduct in our area of landscape refuse of trees that need to be recycled, that we would choose those over others. We get into dyes. Most of the mulches that are dyed are some type of organic source dye, so there's not really a toxicity issue there. Most people are just adjusted to the aesthetics of either a black or a red mulch. I don't have a whole lot of reasons why you wouldn't. It's more preferential in those areas. The one thing maybe is the fact that those dyes are very short-lived. So you buy a red mulch, it tends to turn into a pink mulch. And then a black mulch turns into a gray mulch. And so those aren't very attractive in the landscape. So most of it just boils down to personal preference, but ultimately, a wood mulch that can break down and add that necessary organic matter to our profile is the most important part. Other questions?
So there's a question about weeds. I did say that we have a class coming up, but I think this makes sense. She wants to take care of them now because our class is not till June. So she says they have a bunch of weeds in the flower beds. Is there anything they can do to remove them safely other than by hand? There are lots of little ones that would not destroy the soil. How can we take them out without destroying the soil before prepping the beds for new plants?
Okay. There's a whole lot of strategies as far as weed control, from being okay with it, to manual, to grubbing with tools, to using organic products, and to using conventional herbicides or weed killers that are labeled for specific uses. So within that spectrum, I think a person just has to decide their personal comfort level. All the conventional commercial herbicides, which are labeled as pesticides, do have labels that are approved by the EPA for safe use. But again, these are pesticides. These are chemicals that kill things, pesticides. And so a person has to do that safely, following the label, reading the instructions. And that comes with an amount of ownership on the applicator to make that decision. So I'm not going to just come out and say, spray it with an appropriate labeled herbicide. If you are willing to go that route and you feel that you can do that safely, there are products that are specific to certain needs, certain plant materials, certain seasons. So we have what's called a pre-emergent herbicide, which disturbs the germination of seeds that are developing. So those are products that are put on in timely periods on the calendar to capitalize on application that's right before a germination. So right now would be all of our spring and summer weeds. So application like a month ago would have been really good to control those weeds. And then equally late summer, late August, September would be a good time to do a pre-emergent for winter weeds that grow up in our gardens. And then there's herbicides called post-emergent, which we spray that on the foliage of the plants, and then it absorbs into the plant and terminates it. There are what we call selective or non-selective. So selective means that it's going to impact a certain variety of plants, and other plants may be tolerant to it. So these are, an example would be a lawn weed killer, or that would be applied to a southern turf grass. It's going to impact broadleaf weeds, but it's not going to kill your grass. And then there's other weed killers that are called non-selective, that if you apply that to any vegetation, it's going to have a negative impact and try to kill it. So those are all the one end of the spectrum of our chemical herbicides. When we get into using non-man-made or organic herbicides, these are products that are maybe more short-lived, less impactful on plants, but may be deemed safer for the user. There's a whole range of products that are out there that can be applied on a range of plants in the landscape. Most of these are non-selective. So vinegar, for instance, is a common organic herbicide. A percentage of white vinegar. You spray that on any plant, it's going to kill the foliage and start working its way down to the base of the plant. So you have to be careful with those, that you're applying those products on the target weeds and not drifting onto non-target plants and flowers and so forth. Based off of the question, I think in this case, the answer is probably going to be to move away from either of those, either your conventional or organic herbicides, and probably look at more of just cultural and mechanical practice of grubbing out weeds manually and then covering those areas with a good thick layer of wood mulch to try to discourage other weeds from germinating in those areas.
So Maria says they have some land in Lavaca. I don't know if it is Lavaca or Lavaca County, which is all sandy. She has no clue what she's doing as far as planting or treating the soil.
Yeah, so if go back to that map, we're closer to the coastal range there in Lavaca County, and so we do start to see more of a coastal sand influence in those soils, but they even become trickier because we can have a high water table as well. So you have to be careful with your watering because you can quickly over apply water and saturate your soil profile. So on that, I think you're just going to have to play around with it for a while. I would suggest just doing an internet search for a soil percolation test. This is just a simple test. We can dig a hole at several different depths, but realistic depth is probably 18 to 24 inches deep. And we're going to fill that with water in the evening and then go out in the morning and look to see if that water has drained outside of that hole and it's dry on the bottom. And if we go out there and it's still half full of water, then we know we have, in that type of soil, we have a shallow water table. So that water table is up pretty high. So in those types of situations, when we're planting shrubs and trees and vegetable gardens, we're going to have to really think about elevating those, raising those beds up, building a berm with trees and shrubs planted on them, so that there's plenty of oxygen in the root zone for the roots to be able to persist in.
Following up on the sandy soil question, is it good? Is biochar a good product to help with sandy soil?
I'm sorry, Suma, can you repeat that one?
Yeah, is biochar a good product to help with sandy soil? What is biochar?
Yeah, biochar is basically a wood ash product that is burned in a way that kind of holds the structure of the core components, whether it's wood mulch or other derivatives. But basically, we're using this as what you might call as a magnet to attract nutrients to. So in a soil where nutrients tend to leach out of fairly readily, this is a product that we can use to absorb and bind nutrients into, to hold them in the profile longer. So the short answer is yes, it would be helpful for nutrient retention. But at what scale, I think, is the bigger question I would have. Is if for a small garden, I think you can apply biochar to and be successful. If you get into a large full landscape type scenario, it probably gets a little out of hand as far as doing it in a meaningful way, because this needs to be incorporated into the soil profile. So you have to apply it and till or disc it into the rooting zone of the plants, which is 6 to 8 inches into the profile. So it's a quite substantial amount of work for a raised bed garden. I think yes, it would be helpful. For anything beyond that, I think it's probably not practical.
Okay. Okay, I think we don't have this, but somebody is asking, similar to the booklet we have on pests, do we have a booklet on that shows plant diseases and nutrient deficiencies with pictures and corrective measures?
Well, there are several different sources for that information, and usually it's going to be broken down into use. So there'll be resources for landscape pests and diseases, and then there'll be resources on orchard crops, vegetable crops, etc. That can be found. I would recommend that a person goes to our plant pathology website, because they do have a whole group of fact sheets on disease pressure on plant material. And that web URL is plantclinic.tamu.edu. Again, that's plantclinic.tamu.edu. And there's a full range of publications out there that you can find out pests and diseases that are specific to your crops. But more, let's see if I can do. Let's stop sharing. Okay, so like this right here for vegetables, we do have these types of resources. So this is just a field guide for vegetable diseases. So again, this is very specific. And then our own group here, led by Master Gardener Ralph Fuller, created these for us. And so I keep this here on my desk, and it just helps me to identify common, they're very common vegetable insect pests. So there are specific resources that are out there, but probably easier for a person to find would be to go to our plant clinic website to find more information in one spot on those things.
That's good to know.
All right, what else we got?
I think, oh, somebody asked, is it always a good idea to mix some soil with mulch before applying the mulch?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing that is common is older mulches. We're always recommending that you're reapplying either once or twice a year a new layer of mulch, because it is decomposing, and so you have to kind of keep up with Mother Nature on that as it's being decomposed, is ensuring we have a continual layer there that is, keeping moisture in the soil, impacting the ability of weeds to germinate, keeping the soil temperature moderated, all those good things. So we want to keep mulch on the surface, but we do see pretty commonly that as mulch breaks down, we can get this compacted hydrophobic layer of mulch. Sometimes you'll even be able to flip that over and we'll see some fungal growth in there, white or yellow mat that's decomposing, that's eating the mulch. So it's a good idea before you apply new mulch to take a cultivating rake and go through that garden and break up the old mulch. And maybe in that situation would be to not only break up the mulch, but incorporate a little bit of the topsoil into that, and then apply your fresh layer of mulch over the top of what you've disturbed. And what that does is that it breaks that layer that's hydrophobic apart, so that when we have rain, it is able to percolate through this full layer of mulch and get down into the soil.
Yeah. Okay.
Some good questions here. I say we keep them coming.
Yeah. So if anyone want to ask any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask them. I do not see any other question.
Got them answered, huh?
Yeah. You covered everything. Oh, Maria is very interested in becoming a master gardener. So typically, I think it's in the summer that we open up, late summer.
You can contact Brandy in our office, Brandy Rader, and she will gladly add your name to the priority wait list. And as soon as the class dates are announced, we'll get you registration information. Thank you, Suma.
Sure. So if there are no other questions, that was a great class, and learned a lot, especially about fertilizers and the pH. And I think this is a great time because we are all ready to get planting. And I think this is very perfect timing. Thank you so much, Boone, for your unlimited knowledge and sharing it with all of us. So the next class will be on April 21st. Again, it will be on the Thursday. It is about flowering plants for all seasons, for 4 seasons. So you will learn about, you will get ideas about creating color in your gardens throughout the seasons. So do sign up for that and share the information with everybody else. You will get a reminder. And we will send the video to you all shortly of this class. Anything to be added, Nancy?
No, I think you guys handled everything.
Thank you so much. So spring is finally here.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, no more freezes.
No more. No more. Yeah, I have a hard time announcing that because I had already announced it prior to this last freeze. So I'm eating
Yeah.
crow
Yeah.
on that one, but it sure does look like it out there. It's getting really warm during the afternoon, and it was nice having a little bit of rain with that
Yeah.
last little cold front to kind of soak everything in, and so plants are happy and birds are chirping. So it sure looks like spring out there.
All right. I think we did overrun a little bit, but I think it was worth it because you answered a lot more questions. Thank you again.
You're
And
welcome.
we
Yeah.
will-
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah.
Sumo and Mr. Boone, thank you so much. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself and it wasn't working for some reason. I just have a quick question. I don't want to take your time. So you referred to Brandy Raider, right? So is there a number to contact, or is there a, who should I be contacting in case if I have to enroll myself?
That's right.
What's the office number?
281-342-3034. That's our office number here, and just ask for Miss Brandy Raider, and
Okay.
she'll get you started.
So it's 281-342-3034.
Yes.
Yeah.
And,
Thank you so much.
if you haven't yet, you can, if you go to the Fort Bend Master Gardener website at fbmg.org, there's a page there on membership, and it kind of goes through, gives a description of membership, and then that's where the registration packet will be once we have it updated.
I see. Okay. I'll take a look into it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Look forward to getting to know you.
Thank you.
That'll be for the fall, so we'll kick off in
Right.
September.
Right. Okay.
So we'll welcome Maria and Uma.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
So I think that's about it. We are about to wrap up.
Awesome blossom.
Thank
Do you want me
you.
to just end the meeting?
Yeah,
Okay,
you can stop the recording, and
thank you.
thank you. Thank you
All right.
again.